Hello and welcome. I am Zabraxi. This is Breath of Fire 3, and here are my thoughts. Let's go. The Breath of Fire franchise has been a staple of the JRPG genre since its introduction in 1993. Despite the absolutely insane amount of titles that fall under that JRPG banner, Breath of Fire has always stood out as that one series that everyone seems to fondly point to. Amidst a lot of praise and 6 mainline entries, the series has fallen into a bit of a hiatus and never seemed to hit any super stardom status such as Final Fantasy, Persona, or Kingdom Hearts. Why is that? I have to confess that Breath of Fire 3 is my first real completed introduction to the series. Despite briefly playing through Breath of Fire 1 and 2 here and there, and after even owning a copy of Breath of Fire 4 for years, I finally decided to commit and finish one of these games. After reading countless posts and watching several videos, the most commonly supported starting point seemed to be this third entry in the series. So I gave it a shot, and after about 50 hours or so, I came out the other side. So what now? Am I now a fan of the series that I heard so much about, or am I let down by a 23-year-old game? Let's find out. Breath of Fire is a rather unique series in terms of storytelling and narrative construction. You see, every game's main character is named Ryu. Along Ryu's adventure, you'll bump into some characters who are also often repeated from previous titles. The best example here would be Nina, who is your archetypical mage of the group, but also the princess of a winged race, or at least she has wings in all but Breath of Fire 3, it seems. Despite some minor differences, such as being able to fly in one game versus only acknowledging her past race's ability in the next, these repeating characters serve as a staple amongst the series, while also being individual enough in each of the game's plots. The best comparison I can come up with here is The Legend of Zelda. Every game has a Link and a Zelda, and while each of these two are very different in each entry, they are also fundamentally the same role each time around. If this is done well, then you never feel like you, the player, are missing anything if you've not played any of the other Zelda games. But by having done so, it's always fun to see how this set of Link and Zelda will be different from those you already know. From my experience with Breath of Fire 3, that's exactly how I feel, actually. The characters, the settings, and references never once felt like I was missing details that would be important. However, there was just enough to make me know that in the back of my mind, having played the others in the series would have made me appreciate every locale and interaction even a bit more. It's always been surprising that more franchises never copied that Legend of Zelda approach, with essentially reincarnated characters in the same general setting and world. I'm pleasantly surprised to see that Breath of Fire not only uses this device, but also does so in a way that genuinely inspired me to play through the other entries of the series. I really find the setting of Breath of Fire 3 to be intriguing. So many JRPGs try to tell grand epic tales that seem to desire redefining your perspective on life as a whole. Many settings, such as Final Fantasy VI, are bleak and desolate in many areas. The world in 6 feels cripplingly helpless. However, Breath of Fire 3 is the exact opposite. Every area is filled with color and character. There's almost a childlike wonder in this world, and it's incredibly refreshing. Despite some dark moments that can occur along the journey, Breath of Fire 3 truly takes advantage of its fantasy tag. Sprawling forests, ancient ruins, and volcanic depths all make their appearance. Where normally many of these locales are regularly expected, there's always some twist that ensures that this game makes each unique setting stand out and compared to the rest of its competition. The praise can also be attributed to some of the dungeon design, but we're going to get back to that. An example of a memorable area would be the sector of Junktown. The surrounding areas are junkyards, as you'd expect, where scavengers and pirates all rip through washed-up metal and buried machinery. While the whole area gives you a very junkyard vibe and aesthetic, you also experience highly advanced technology deep below. Breath of Fire 3 loves to take two similar aesthetics that would usually be two separate levels and throw them together in one area, providing a whole new experience than you would normally see. I'll probably end up saying this a lot or making comparisons along the same claim, but Breath of Fire 3 doesn't ever make new things per se, but it capitalizes on iteration rather than innovation. The only real setting I think that's missed out on here as a typical environment would maybe be a snow level, yet honestly, each zone offers enough of a twist on what you would expect that you never really notice these things. Well, I mean, I guess I did just notice it, but yeah, you know what I mean. That's the key to Breath of Fire 3's level design. Each area you walk into, you have a preconceived notion about what you're gonna see, and then the game shuffles another layer on top of this area, and bam, something now new has appeared. For example, there's a mine that you explore right at the start of the game and return to in the middle of the plot. The first time here, it just seems like a normal mine, and you're not really exploring much of it at all, to be honest. However, upon your return, there's some unsettling ghost spookiness happening. While it may seem simple, turning your traditional underground mine level into now a haunted house mine level essentially is just a simple alteration, but it makes a huge impact. One pretty big complaint I do have about the setting, though, is that the cities feel so small and barren. There's so little to do in each major city area. A great way to get around this would have been to implement something unique about each major city location, maybe a unique shop or something, but that's just never explored. The capital of Windia, to the port city, to the arena city, all of them are fundamentally the same while you're on their city levels, but it's just a bit of a bummer. JRPGs create some of the best major town areas in video games, but Breath of Fire 3 is nowhere near in that category. I'll accept that there's a bit of a technical limitation to prevent these towns from being a sprawling metropolis on the hardware of the PS1, but they don't even feel like a village half the time. When the capital of Windia comes off as little more than a rural neighborhood, both visually and interactively, I cannot help but have had my immersion aggressively shaken. I have to give major props to Capcom and how they've creatively integrated their environments with the narrative. Breath of Fire is definitely not some big budget title. It's always been in this B-tier budget range, so creating a monolithic world and lore it's just out of the question. I didn't expect a 3 or 4 disc epic like Legend of Dragoon or Lunar 2, but what I didn't expect also was a 40 to 50 hour creative use of Metroid-style backtracking. Yeah, yes I know, backtracking is one of those really dirty words in gaming, but asset reuse is not inherently problematic, again, as Metroid has shown. Metroid Prime, for example, does this really brilliant thing where you explore only but one layer of an environment, and when you've unlocked new abilities, you return to further explore what's deeper below than what you've already seen. Creative uses of these landscapes can feel more like exploring familiar lands rather than backtracking. I am happy to report that Breath of Fire 3 does exactly that. For a smaller budget, Capcom gets every penny from the levels that they've created. Even the opening towns and surroundings hide secrets which the player will slowly uncover as the game continues. Now, there are some of those dreaded back and forth quests, but it's very rare and it's mostly tied to side quests more than anything. I'm afraid to touch on too much of the plot because, man, I mean, pretty much any details could give some pretty serious spoiler possibilities. So trust me when I say that I will be tiptoeing very carefully around spoilers here. Stories are just too important to the JRPG genre, and I don't want to ruin that for anybody. The overarching tale of Breath of Fire 3 is the culmination of many small plots bundled together by the thread of a single question. Who is Ryu? This dilemma makes up quite literally 95% of this entire title. Might I say that this was actually so refreshing. Honestly, I love the grand epics that RPGs are able to tell, yet so few journeys are about asking and answering one question. Ryu is a bit of an aberration, being part dragon and part humanoid. His race was thought to be extinct from a war against them for the world's fear of a dragon's overwhelming power. Despite that, Ryu's journey is one of a weak child turning into a strong and confident young man. You can see this change not just narratively, but also visually through gameplay. In the early elements of the game, when you run into a random battle, you can see Ryu desperately trying to grab his sword rather pathetically. When he swings, he doesn't even look at the enemy, as if attacking another one is still horrific to him. There is one plot point I would love to point out here, and that is that when you help rescue Nina from two villains, Nina has just saved you from being locked up in prison, and now she needs Ryu's help. He, for the first time, grabs his weapon confidently and swings his sword with discipline and precision in order to protect his rescuer. Intimate, humble, whimsical, these are some of the words that come to my mind when describing Breath of Fire 3. You'll not leave this game with some radically different worldview from when you started, but what you'll have is an experience like that of The Hobbit versus The Lord of the Rings. Fantastical and personal stories are just too rare, quite honestly. I constantly kept saying how much I loved how personal this story was, and just how pleasant it was to have such a small-scale plot aimed at simply getting answers for the main character's questions. However, there's a pretty major problem that does come along with this, though. Breath of Fire 3 spends about 40 hours with that original question of, who is Ryu? And answers it about 5 hours before the end of the game. In classical JRPG storytelling, there then becomes a large villain that shows up out of nowhere at the end. I've heard that Breath of Fire veterans could see this coming from a mile away, but for me, that last 5 to 10% of the game was genuinely a slog that I just couldn't even remotely care about. If the final villain, and the final twist for that matter, had even just the slightest setup, then this wouldn't be an issue. Right near the end of the game, there comes this massive info dump and a brilliantly set up boss that I genuinely thought was the finale, even tying back some details from the very beginning, both visually and narratively, and yet what comes of all this is a, whoops, actually the villain is Ganon. Probably the one major trap to using the Legend of Zelda formula it's fallen into here, and it's jarring as all hell. I'm not trying to be dramatic when I say that that particular moment, that those final 5 to 10 hours almost made me not want to complete the game. I went from looking forward to coming home each and every day to dabble a bit more into this journey, to eventually having to convince myself to wrapping up Breath of Fire 3 so that way I could give this review in good conscience. The final twist as well is such a giant mess. What was clearly intended to be an emotional roller coaster that should have brought me to tears was instead a feeling of frustration and confusion. I wasn't shocked or sad. I felt cheated. The game just pulled the surprise with no indication, no context, and because of that, there was just no payoff outside my feelings of aggravation. I get that the final villain is iconic and that it makes sense in the larger world of Breath of Fire, but it definitely fell short in this particular narrative. I don't have too much to say on the gameplay of Breath of Fire 3. If you've played a turn-based JRPG, then you understand practically everything there is to know here. At the start of the round, you will choose your character's actions, and then all of your units and the enemies take their turns in order of their agility stat. Now granted, this does make armor and weapons have a bit more decision-making behind them, as knowing when your character's turn order will be is pretty important. Honestly though, all that really matters is that a character has either really high agility to ensure that they go before other enemies and get extra turns in between, or you just tank their agility to 0 with really powerful heavy items. The thing is, you never really know what an average agility level is, and you'll never know what your enemy's agility values are, so anything that seems like a mid-range agi stat is just impossible to plan around, so I just didn't. There are fundamentally only 2 elements of combat that are unique here though. First is that all 6 members of your party are basically a class plus Blue Mage. This is just as cool as it sounds, by the way. So enemies in the world use abilities. Nothing special about that, right? However, any of your characters can use an action on their turn called Examine. This forfeits that character's turn. However, if an enemy uses an ability that can be learned, then your character will learn that attack or skill. If that particular character can't learn that specific skill, but it can be learned by someone else, then you'll receive a different notification, and thus now you can try and figure out who can learn it. This offers a whole lot of fun variety and ensures that every new area you discover and every new monster you encounter has more value than the sum of its parts. Getting completely annihilated by an enemy's attack can be pretty annoying, but if you know that you can learn that attack, then there's this vindication when you retaliate back at those same mobs with the devastation that they originally thrust upon you. Figuring out who can learn what also incentivizes you to mix and match your party member as well. Unfortunately, that only applies really in theory. Almost the entire game requires Ryu in the party, which instantly locks 1/3 of your total composition. The fact that Momo is essentially your only support character also now locks 2 of your 3 available party members. Also, the field abilities available to Momo and Ryu are overwhelmingly used more than any others, so again, it ensures that these 2 always have to be around. It's a bit annoying having one mechanic encourage variety while another ensures that you never really get to try new things. This disjointed design thankfully doesn't continue into the dragon splicing mechanic. Around the world, Ryu will discover certain genes to unlock so that he can transform into incredibly powerful dragon forms. What is exceptionally awesome here is that you can actually combine these genes to create different forms. Some configurations can turn Ryu into different elements, perhaps different physiques of dragon, providing different types of benefits, some super omega forms that can devastate but not last long, and way more. There's a lot, and I definitely haven't seen everything that this game has to offer. This is such a fascinating mechanic, and having this creativity available to the player is something that is unfortunately only available to this entry in the series, apparently. I had so much fun patching together these different genes just to see what I could do with Ryu. If the Breath of Fire series ever did reboot, then honestly, the dragon gene splicing is a mandatory returning mechanic. My time with Breath of Fire 3 is incredibly bittersweet. I thoroughly enjoyed my time, and I'm so thankful that I have finally taken a real first step into the series. While it's not anything super special in terms of innovation, my experience was still, well, thematic is probably the best word. This series has such a unique style that just pulls you right in and doesn't let you leave. Outside my gripes with the ending, so little is wrong with Breath of Fire 3. And there's way more that I still haven't been able to touch on. Sometimes you don't need something legendary, but instead just a fun journey to escape reality is just what the doctor ordered. The bitter feeling is that I already know that my future with this franchise is incredibly limited. I never really stuck with the first two games, but I recall seeing potential. Enter Breath of Fire 3, and I believe that potential is realized, and from everything the fandom is claiming, Breath of Fire 4 is arguably even better. Yet despite the hate for Dragon Quarter possibly being a bit overblown, from what I have seen of it, I'm just not interested. Then there's Breath of Fire 6, which I can't even play since the servers are no longer live, and to be fair, what I did see just looked like miserable gameplay regardless. Imagine playing Final Fantasy IV as your first entry into that series, and then finding out that there's 15 other entries, but only like 2 of them were good. That would suck, and it might deflate the excitement bubble that built up after having such a good time. With Capcom having been doing great things with Monster Hunter and Resident Evil lately, the company has really turned around for the better in these last 5 years or so. Combine that with the fact that games like Bravely Default 2 is getting its second sequel, that Ys is becoming genuinely successful, Octopath Traveler is becoming an actual franchise now, and Tales went from a B tier to probably A tier game, and maybe, just maybe, Breath of Fire has a chance to return. I'm only a new fan here, and it already feels like I've been waiting the same 20 years as the rest of you for the next great installment. Here's to hoping that Ryu and his friends come back real soon, because, man, they deserve it. Thank you so much for watching this video. It means a lot to me. If you've made it this far and you liked the video, please hit that like button down below and subscribe if you want to see more video game reviews and more game discussion. I have a load of it on the channel, so please also feel free to check what I already have out. And if you want to talk about Breath of Fire 3, I mean, let me know what you think. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What do you agree with me on? What do you disagree with me on? If you made it this far and you hate the video, by the way, oh, don't forget to dislike the video too. That's always fun. Please be ruthless about it. That'd be great. So I have nothing more to say. I had a lot of fun, and I'm willing and pretty excited to play Breath of Fire 4. So thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye!